Welcome to Empowering Texas Voters, a journey through voting issues, the podcast dedicated to informing and engaging Texans on the critical topic of voting rights. Today we have a special guest, Derek Avery, who will share his experience on this crucial topic. Derek, thank you for joining us. Let's dive right in.
Thank you so much, AJ, and thank you so much, Derek, for joining. I'm Elaine Campbell, Vice President of Voter Services and Education for the League of Women Voters Dallas, and I am so honored to have Derek with us, who today we are going to discuss reaching out to underrepresented communities, not just getting people registered to vote, but actually to the polls. Assuring that helping people get engaged and motivated to get to the polls. So the first thing I wanted to do was kind of define underrepresented communities to see if you agree with the definition that I think of. And what I think of are not necessarily, I don't think of the number of people who are Black or brown in elected positions in Dallas. I think of the communities where resources are allocated less. Because in Dallas County and Dallas City, there are communities that historically and today, the resources that are provided to the city and the county, they always are on the bottom. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Absolutely. That's a very good definition.
Okay, awesome. So, Derek, I would like then first for you to introduce yourself and in your experience, and then tell us, in your experience, what are some of the significant obstacles and barriers that prevent underrepresented communities from fully wanting to participate in the electoral process?
That's a good one, because I like how you said wanting to participate, because I think that a lot of times there's a misconception, because we have a lot of people registered, like you said earlier, and we have people on the books, on the rolls, but when it comes down to showing up to the polls, there are barriers. And one of the things for me, you asked me to introduce myself. I'm sorry.
Please do.
I'm Derek Avery. I am the president and CEO of Core Development. It's a fully integrated real estate development firm, but that focuses on revitalizing communities without gentrifying communities. And as a community member, I'm somebody who advocates for people to vote. I've run for office before, and I did it because of some of the things that we talked about. I mean, we have less than 10% voter turnout in Dallas County. And that means that of the registered voters on the best elections, we only have 10%. And that's usually when it's aligned with a national election. And I think one of the barriers for people wanting to get out there is people don't feel like people who are representing them are doing anything for them that's tangible, that they can see on the ground. And that's one of the issues that I've seen, because we'll see stats, we'll see statistics, we'll see things that people have done, but when you walk outside and when you live your everyday life, you don't see it or feel it. And I think that's one of the things that I noticed, even myself, because it's hard to look at the presentations and hear the speeches, and they're great, but then we look for the results and we look for the impact. And impact is what we really want to see, because we have this right to vote, and we have people who aren't showing up to vote. So there has to be some level of disconnect. And I also shine a light on our elected officials, because it is incumbent on them to get people out. Now, we know that elections favor the incumbents, but should we be complacent in being okay with us having less than 10% voter turnout? That's something that definitely bothers me. So I think the access to transportation is one thing, but it's a will. It's understanding that, does my vote actually count? Does it do anything? And people, when they can't see that impact, they don't feel like it counts.
So what are some ways that you have, because I know that you have had a path where this is very important to you, and you're not a person who just says, this is a problem and not do anything.
Right.
If you see a problem, then let's do something to help it.
Absolutely.
So what are some ways that you have been able to implement to help people understand the importance of their vote based on their lived experience?
That's good. So a lot of times, we hear it said, people focus on the national elections. But one of the things that I do, and it's direct, you have to have these conversations. I've gotten on the DART train and had literal conversations with people most folks won't talk to. We've knocked on doors. But those actual direct conversations, asking people, well, why don't you show up to vote? And then my question to them is, what can we all do better? How can we serve you? And typically, the thing that works is making it real for someone, making it real to their situation right now. If you're talking to someone who's unhoused,
right,
well, their first concern is not voting.
Yeah.
They don't care who's elected if they don't have somewhere to live.
Right.
And we think of it with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think of it in that way. I think of it, we have to handle the physiological needs before anyone can even get to the next level. So voting is not a high priority if you have people suffering. So one of the solutions is always understanding why people aren't there, because I think we always have to understand the why, not what we assume. Not, well, you should just show up,
Right.
People died for your vote. I'm sensitive to that. I get it.
Right.
I'm a black man in America.
Yeah.
I do understand that. But also, at this point in time, if I'm struggling, while that's in the back of my mind and it's probably creating guilt, I also have these needs that aren't being met. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we do is we focus on meeting people's needs. Because if you want someone to turn out to vote, you want them to understand how everything affects them, you have to make it plain for them and make it simple. When I was riding on the DART, I was talking to a young man, and he said, they've never done anything for me.
Right.
And with him saying that, it's because his personal situation, in his mind, no one has. Because he's unhoused, he doesn't have a job, and it's not that he's lazy, he has a background. And so I think when I talked to him about some of the simple things that are happening, I said, right now there's a charter amendment that'll be on the ballot in November in Dallas, because he had 2 felonies because of weed. Mm-hmm. I mean, I shouldn't say weed, I should say marijuana. Okay. But he had 2 felonies, and that a lot of that was preventing him from being able to get the type of job that he wanted. So it created a domino effect in his life. But then when I told him about that ballot initiative, he said, oh, well, that gives me something to vote for, because that could directly impact my life. Now, of course, he didn't use that language. I'm using that language, but that's the gist of what he said. So I think to answer the question in short order, we have to make it relevant to people's current situations.
Right.
And even talking to someone that's more affluent, maybe a local business owner, what they see a lot of times is they'll see that, our government agencies will run after the large corporations.
Yes.
And while that's okay, most people work for small businesses, because a small business is typically, $5 million in revenue and under per year. Mm-hmm. And so if we're constantly, from an economic development standpoint, chasing the large organizations, but we're not investing in our small businesses, we're actually not investing in our local people. And so when you say things like that to folks, it perks their ears, and they're like, oh, so now you get someone who is unhoused, who's looking for a job, but also a business owner. So you're starting to bridge the gap with getting people who are underrepresented, typically at the polls, mm-hmm. to actually come out to the polls, because you're making it relevant to them. And that's something that's been very effective. Now I'm only one person.
Right.
And so, I can only do so much, but trying to duplicate those efforts to get out to more people, to have those genuine conversations and point them to impact that impacts their lives immediately.
I think that's some very good. Those are some really good suggestions, because I was thinking the same thing. You are only one person. Now, are you familiar, though, with some organizations that are actually, I know that the League of Women Voters Dallas, we do have education sessions that we are working on, that we have been doing, going to different groups. One of the things that we are going to start doing is even going to shelters, registering unhoused people. However, like you mentioned, we can't just register people. We also have to have conversations while we're registering them of their lived experience and what is needed for them to be able to be encouraged to vote. So are you familiar right now? Are there any organizations that you're working with or that you are leading for those types of activities?
So right now, I've actually taken some time away because the campaign took a lot out of me. So as far as directly doing it, it's just been individual. But there are plenty of organizations that are working on it. Of course, you have your Urban League Young Professionals that they tirelessly do work. You have NAACP. You have a lot of local organizations. Of course, League of Women Voters. Of course, Faith in Texas. I used to be on the board of Faith in Texas, and those organizations are on the ground. And of course, like the clergy, they're all doing their things within the community to try to encourage folks. I think so. There's organizations doing it, but one of the things that I would love to see in that, once I come back up for air a little bit,
Right.
I want to start bringing people together more, focusing on some of the issues, because we have a lot of silos, and I think that's the thing that when I first moved here over a decade ago, that a lot of people told me about, and so I took some time to learn. But I think that what prevents us from doing that is because there are so many well-meaning people and well-meaning organizations, but I don't think a lot of times we're focused on the same objective. I think that let's do our thing over here, let's do our thing over there, and then we end up duplicating some of the same efforts, but it's not making the impact, because when we sit down and look at the result, the result is still, our last election we had 4% turnout.
Yeah, that was, yes,
So
that's correct.
when we say people are working hard and we're getting people registered,
Yes.
but that translating it to getting people to show up to the polls, we need to have someone quarterbacking.
That's interesting that you said
part.
that, because actually that leads directly into the next question that we wanted to follow up with you on, which was
Sure.
how can policymakers and community leaders work together to implement some of these changes? Like,
Absolutely.
How can do you have some ideas of how we?
I do. So one of the things that I always tell to people, because a lot of times the truth cuts both ways. It can bring people together, and it can be offensive, and a lot of times, but it's offensive because we all have egos. And one of the greatest things, and this is the type of leadership style that I've always taken on, and I think that we need to see more of. Are y'all familiar with the We Are the World video?
Yes.
No, I'm not.
Are you seriously not?
What was
She's
the
much younger.
That's okay.
That is
this
okay.
is
Tell me.
excellent. This is excellent.
It is okay. It never crossed my mind that some people would not be familiar with that video, but there will be people who are not familiar with that
Right.
video. And look at this.
I mean, think about it. I'm 41 years old. It came out the year I was born, so
Right.
I'm only familiar with it because my folks watched it, and I saw it. Of course, as a kid, I didn't get it, but when I got a little bit older, when I was in high school, and I was going through a bit of a rough time. We had 5 people in my house, and 3 of them died, and so it was just my brother and I. And so a lot of that, I was doing, coping mechanisms. So I would watch
some trauma.
I would watch some comedy every day. I would watch American Pie every day when I came home from school. But then I would also watch the We Are the World video, because one of the things that resonated with me was Quincy Jones. And the thing that Quincy
Yes.
Jones brought 75 of some of the biggest entertainers in the world into one room. Mm-hmm. And he put a simple message at the door when they walked in. He said, "Leave your egos at the door." it seems so simple, but the fact that he was able to get all of those people in the room and they call him the maestro and they produced this song and it raised millions of dollars. It was really raising money for Africa, for a cause in Africa. But that's the leadership style that I don't think we see a lot of.
I agree with that completely.
And that's what I would like to see with our elected officials, and I would like to see us do. Come into a room and leaving the egos at the door, because we're all sensitive. Yeah. We all have the things that touch us more. So of course, when you tell the truth, if it's something that makes me uncomfortable, of course I'm gonna be offended. But we have to get past being offended to get to being effective.
Absolutely, I love that.
Yeah. So that's what I'd like to see.
I can't wait.
Oh, it's awesome. It's awesome watching, and you even see some of the personalities in those videos. If you watch some of even the background of the making of it, you have Michael Jackson and you have Kenny Loggins, in the same room, Bruce Springsteen. You have people who may know of each other, but they're literally working together and everybody is on one accord, and these are superstars. And so that's what I would like to see for our elected officials. Okay, we focus on the problems, not each other or the people.
Or our egos, right?
Or our egos. Right. Leave the ego at the door and say, okay, what are we going to do to make sure we don't have people unhoused? What are we going to do to increase voter turnout? Even if it means you losing an election because the people want someone else. We have to remove that ego, because if the people want new leadership, you have to make it easy for them, because you're representing the people.
Right.
And I think sometimes we forget that.
Yeah. So I'm a firm believer that lived experience is data. One of the things that you and I see each other in the community a lot, because we are both actually in talking to people,
right.
Different areas all over the community. So I would like to hear a little bit of some. Obviously, we're not going to use names of people or anything like that, but There's some lived experience. One of the things that I know that you're involved with, I'd like to hear a little bit about, which I didn't know about until you educated me. And when I educate people, they're shocked about that we have a community in Dallas County, about 20 minutes south of here, where the people do not have water.
Right.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
And just believe it or not, when I was there, I know they have their own voting center. I believe they're voters. But if you could just talk a little bit about that community and the lived experience of what they are going through, engaging with their political officials.
Right. So Sand Branch, Texas. Mm-hmm. It's an unincorporated town. We're sitting downtown right now. We're only 20 minutes away. I think you may have driven further to get here today, AJ. And it's unincorporated, so it's called the ETJ of Dallas County, so it's not an incorporated city. So the county is responsible for all of its municipal services. And the town it's a freedman's town. And basically that's where people, when they were freed from slavery, established this town. So it's historic. And they do not have running water in 2024. Now let me also put that into perspective. When you don't have municipal running water, it's okay when you're in a rural area and you have well water and you have access to septic. However, their wells are contaminated. And the University of Texas at Arlington just released a new study where they did the testing and they did confirm that that they are all indeed contaminated and that water is not drinkable. Because there are some people who were like, well, our well water is drinkable, but sediment started coming up into the well water decades ago. So this has been a problem for a very long time. This has been a problem since the 80s, since the 70s. So when you don't have municipal water, you also don't have sewer service. You also don't have trash collection. So imagine when you go sit your trash can outside or you sit your trash outside, these folks are burning their trash in 2024. That's ridiculous. And it's 20 minutes from here. Now, one of the issues that I had when I understood it was, y'all know what I do for a living. I'm a real estate developer, but I'm the one that they make fun of because I actually care about the people. So, because you think people first and buildings later, because you build the buildings for the people, not fitting the people into the buildings. And that's the simplest way I can explain, my strategy. So when you think about what I do, developing raw land, infrastructure comes first.
Right.
So if I'm looking at a development, it takes 3 months to put in infrastructure. 3 months. And these folks have been without water for decades since it's been contaminated, because it makes me upset because it's unacceptable. So one of the things that I sat down and I talked to my civil engineer, I said, hey, man, this doesn't really make sense. What am I missing? Because, for me, I don't assume that I know everything, because I do not. I assume that maybe I've missed something, because surely people who are smarter than I am, who have been in leadership, would see this problem and be able to solve it. We sat down and, it's in a floodplain, but it's also never flooded. And I have to give y'all some context. I'm from Houston. The whole city is almost a floodplain. So hearing floodplain didn't really scare me. And so I called, I talked to my civil engineer. He said, okay, well, you just have to see where the base flood elevation is. We're going to get a little nerdy for a second, if y'all don't mind. But I'm going to make it simple. So just finishing up on Sand Branch.
Yeah.
It's an $8 million fix.
That was going to be my next question. What are some solutions
It's very simple.
to this?
I shouldn't say simple. Someone told me to stop oversimplifying things because they're simple to me. It's a complex, but not doable. It's very doable. It's something that it's done every day. I mean, we literally put water lines. The biggest thing that I learned was when I called FEMA. First, it took my civil engineer and I 30 minutes to determine the issue and determine a quick solution. 30 minutes. Then I called FEMA myself and I said, hey, how do we, get this out of the floodplain? Because, my civil engineer made a suggestion. He said, well, if you write a letter of map revision, it may be able to be removed from the floodplain, because that's typically the excuse given to why they don't have running water, because it's in a floodplain and you have to build 10 feet above the base flood elevation. Well, if it's never flooded in Sand Branch, then you typically go to the Army Corps of Engineers. It may take a year, and you write a letter of map revision. And a lot of times they'll adjust the map and move it out of the floodplain. But the thing that really got to me was when I spoke to the civil engineer after he went and did a little deeper dive. He said, well, if you don't disturb the floodplain, if you're putting underground lines in, then it does not disturb the floodplain as long as you don't recompact the dirt. So imagine you take dirt out of the ground, you put in a water pipe, you only replace it with the same volume that was there before. You have not disturbed the floodplain because you have not changed the volume. So all of that to say is we can actually bring water to Sand Branch while it's in the floodplain without affecting the floodplain. And that's an $8 million fix. I'll reiterate that. Okay. But we also created a short-term fix that I'm not going to fully release it yet, but we have a website, Water for Sand Branch, waterforsandbranch.org. Okay. And it's the Water for Sand Branch Coalition that we established. And I'm doing it all on a volunteer basis. This is not something, I'm not getting paid to develop Sand Branch or anything like that. I'm not doing it to get elected for anything. It's literally to make sure they have water. And
once
so
you see a problem, you can't unsee it.
You can't you can't unsee the problem, especially when you have the skill set to fix it. And a lot of things, it goes back to the Quincy Jones thing, because there are a lot of people saying different things. There's a lot of disinformation. We just did a disinformation campaign there. And so a lot of times you just need a quarterback. And so I guess, I got volunteered
Voluntold.
to be that quarterback, because I want everyone to come together and let's have a solution. So the EPA, of course, is being very helpful with that, and so a lot of times the federal government a lot of times supersedes the local if there's any pushback on that area. So it's going really good. So I set a time clock on May 1st of 2024 to have water in Sand Branch within 24 months. So,
Okay.
Wow.
So we're trying to do
Good luck.
within 24
Yes.
months what hasn't been done in 40 years. 40
Amazing.
I
years.
love it.
That's awesome.
So,
What would you see right now, since you have been going there, because I know you kind of started going there kind of regularly, have you seen a positive movement of people becoming more engaged?
so yes,
And
there's a voting
interested-
location
Yes.
in Sand Branch. However, it doesn't have huge turnout, but it was a fight to get a voting location there. And
But it's there.
it's there.
Yes.
It's there. And so that was a huge victory. That was a huge victory. So I appreciate like Bonnie Mathias and the folks that were working on that, and Pastor Frank Alexander, who's been really instrumental down there, and that's who usually I work with when I'm down there with this church. And there's an energy there now. Of course, the people are distrustful. Of course, I show up, they're like, what are you here for? We've heard plenty of people say the same things and nothing gets done. And then some people were like, well, I hope you don't end up like Pastor Cahey, who, he ended up passing away in a house fire. And so a lot of people were like, we don't want to touch it because, are you going to live? And, we're all emotional.
Of course.
And I have no, I'm not fearful that anyone's gonna unalive me or anything like that. But those are the things that sometimes keeps people away from doing things. But now that they've seen that I'm consistent, and it's not about money, it's not about power, it's not about any of those things. It's literally about solving the problem. And I've been a bridge to bringing everyone in. Now there's an energy, there's a little bit of hope. But you have to understand, when people have been promised things for decades, everyone that shows up, they're going to be skeptical. And there's still people skeptical now, and that's
course,
okay.
of course.
I can't be swayed by the emotions of the people that I'm leading. So in this case, I just have to stay on course. And we've been consistent. Every month we have a community meeting, and they've grown each time.
That's wonderful. I do know that they have, because I met her, they have, they may have more now. They have one very active multi-county VDR who goes to your meetings to make sure that people are registered.
Yes.
They do use Vote 411 so that they are educated
Yes.
about what's on the polls, which is awesome. And I remember Bonnie Mathias, who I do want to give a shout out to her.
Yes, she's awesome.
She was a large advocate of assuring and helping all of us understand, including myself, why, not based on the number of people, but why a vote center must be there.
Yes.
So I'm glad that is happening and it is still there, and I think that is wonderful.
Yes.
I do want to make a little bit of shift because I
Sure.
do know that you also work with unhoused.
Yes.
And one of the things that the league is actively also wanting to engage in more is assuring that people who are unhoused are registered as well as educated and able to get to the polls. Because there are organizations that we could put some links to that will make sure for free, that will make sure that people get to the polls during election.
Yes.
But what are some ways, though, that we could help engage and assure that unhoused people, taking into consideration, like you mentioned, that if a person is not knowing where they're going to sleep, researching candidates and figuring out how to vote is not on the top of their mind.
No.
So what are some ways that we can help in that area from what you've seen?
Again, just like I said before, going back to meeting people's needs. Because we focus on guilt tripping people into voting. We focus on saying you should vote for this. But if you're not meeting someone's needs, they don't care what you have to say. They don't care who's, on the ballot. They don't care what's on the ballot.